He thought it was just a small act of kindness on a freezing winter morning, giving a ride to a shivering mom and her little boy. But days later, when they showed up at his door with a velvet pouch and the keys to a mansion, his life took a turn no one saw coming. Moving into the estate should have been a blessing until whispers started spreading, eyes turned cold, and a shocking moment at a high society gathering set the entire town on edge. A little boy's innocent words shattered years of silence and exposed a truth powerful enough to change lives or destroy them. Now, the poor dad finds himself caught in a storm of secrets, betrayal, and a battle for the only home that's ever felt safe. But when powerful people try to push them out, how far will he go to protect the family he never expected but can't bear to lose? What really happened inside that mansion? And will the truth set them freer? Tear them apart forever? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Through the pre-dawn darkness, Evan Brooks squinted at the road ahead. The sleet hammered against his pickup's windshield, creating a constant drumming that matched his worried heartbeat. His wipers worked overtime, pushing away the icy mix that threatened to obscure his vision. He'd left early for his school bus route, knowing the weather would make the drive tricky. The familiar streets of their small town looked different in the murky half-light, with ice coating the bare tree branches and collecting in dangerous patches on the asphalt. That's when he saw it. Hazard lights blinking weakly through the sleet. A minivan sat tilted on the shoulder, a thin stream of smoke rising from its hood despite the freezing weather. Evan's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he carefully pulled over, his tires crunching on the icy gravel. "Lord, let them be okay," he whispered, reaching for his heavy winter coat from the passenger seat. As he approached the minivan, his boots leaving tracks in the fresh sleet, he saw movement inside. A woman and a small child huddled together in the front seats, their breath visible in the cold air. The woman's face showed relief mixed with apprehension when Evan tapped gently on her window. She cracked it open just enough to hear him. "Ma'am, are you all right? I saw the smoke." "The engine just died," she replied, her voice shaking slightly from the cold. "We've been here about 20 minutes. My phone." She held up a dead cell phone helplessly. The little boy pressed his face against the window, his dark eyes wide with curiosity despite the situation. Evan noticed they both wore thin jackets, clearly not prepared for this sudden winter storm. "I'm Evan Brooks, the school bus driver for Roosevelt Elementary," he said, trying to put them at ease. "I've got blankets and heat in my truck. Why don't you folks come warm up while we call for a tow?" The woman hesitated, studying his face. Evan understood her caution. A stranger offering help in the pre-dawn hours would make anyone wary. He stepped back, giving her space to decide. "Noah, stay close to me," she told her son as she finally opened the door. The boy immediately grabbed her hand, and they hurried through the sleet to Evan's truck. Once inside the cab, Evan cranked up the heat and pulled 2 thick blankets from behind the seat. "I'm Grace," the woman said, wrapping one blanket around Noah before accepting the other for herself. "Grace Alvarez, thank you for stopping." "No decent person would drive past someone in trouble," Evan replied, pulling out his own phone. "Let me call Joe's Towing. He's reliable, won't overcharge you." As he made the call, Evan noticed Noah's teeth had stopped chattering. The boy was now looking around the truck's interior with interest, especially at the small photo tucked into the visor. Evan's daughter Libby at her last birthday. "Is that your little girl?" Noah asked. "That's my Libby," Evan smiled. "She's 8. "I'm 6. Noah announced proudly. "Mommy, can Libby come play sometime?" Grace gave an embarrassed smile. "Noah, honey, the tow truck will be here in about 40 minutes. Evan interrupted smoothly. "There's a diner just up the road that opens early. Let me take you there where it's warm, and you can have some breakfast while you wait." Grace started to protest, but another icy gust rocked the truck, and she nodded gratefully. Evan carefully pulled back onto the road, driving slowly through the worsening storm. The Paradise Diner's neon sign cut through the sleet, its windows glowing warmly. Inside, the heat and smell of coffee wrapped around them like a welcome embrace. The waitress, Betty, had known Evan for years and quickly brought them to a booth. "Coffee for the adults," she said knowingly. "And hot chocolate for this young man?" Noah's face lit up as he looked at his mother. Grace nodded, though Evan noticed her discreetly checking the prices on the menu. "Order whatever you'd like," Evan said quietly. "It's my treat." "Oh no, I couldn't," Grace began. "Please, I insist." His voice was gentle but firm. "Nobody should face a morning like this on an empty stomach." Grace's shoulders relaxed slightly, and she helped Noah pick out pancakes with scrambled eggs. She ordered only toast for herself, but Evan asked Betty to add a side of eggs and bacon to her plate. As they waited for their food, Noah chatted about his favorite cartoons and his upcoming school play. Grace slowly began to thaw, both literally and figuratively, sharing that they had been returning from visiting her sister when the van broke down. The food arrived steaming hot, and Noah dove into his pancakes with enthusiasm. Even Grace couldn't resist the crispy bacon, though she tried to insist again on paying when Betty brought the check. Evan waved away her protests. "Consider it neighborly insurance. Someday I might need help myself." A car horn sounded outside. Grace peered through the window and nodded. "That's my sister. She came back for us." She helped Noah into his jacket, now dry and warm. "Miss Brooks, I don't know how to thank you." "Just Evan. And seeing you folks safe and warm is thanks enough." Noah surprised them both by throwing his arms around Evan's waist in a quick hug before running to the door. Grace followed more slowly, dignity in every step despite her circumstances. Through the window, Evan watched as Noah turned to wave enthusiastically from the back seat of his aunt's car before they pulled away into the gray morning. Betty refilled his coffee cup. "You'll be late for your route," she observed. "Some things are more important than being on time," Evan replied, watching the taillights disappear into the sleet. The morning sun struggled to break through heavy clouds as Evan guided his yellow school bus through the slush-covered streets. In the rearview mirror, he watched Libby chatting with her friends, her brown ponytail bouncing as she gestured animatedly. His daughter's smile always brightened, even the gloomiest days. "Remember, soccer practice is canceled," he called out as the bus pulled up to Riverside Elementary. "I'll pick you up at the regular time." "Got it, Dad." Libby hopped down the steps, adjusting her too small winter coat. Evan made a mental note to check the thrift store for a bigger one, then immediately wondered how he'd manage even that small expense. After dropping off the last student, Evan parked the bus in the school lot and headed to his truck. He had 3 handyman jobs lined up today, maybe enough to put a dent in what they owed. But before he could leave, a familiar silver Mercedes blocked his path. Mr. Patterson, his landlord, stepped out wearing an expensive wool coat. "Brooks, just the man I needed to see." Evan's stomach tightened. "Morning, Mr. Patterson. I was just heading to work." "This won't take long." Patterson's shoes crunched on the icy gravel. "You're 3 months behind on rent. I've been patient because you've always been reliable before, but I'm running a business here, not a charity." "I understand, sir." Evan fought to keep his voice steady. "I picked up extra work. I can get you half by next week." "Half isn't good enough anymore." Patterson's breath fogged in the cold air. "I need the full amount by the end of the month, or I'll have to start eviction proceedings. I've got other tenants lined up who can pay on time." The words hit Evan like a physical blow. "Please, Mr. Patterson, my daughter." "Is exactly why you need to get this sorted." Patterson's expression softened slightly. "Look, you're a good tenant when you pay, but 3 months? I can't keep carrying you." "I understand." Evan's shoulders sagged. "I'll figure something out." "End of the month, Brooks. I mean it this time." Evan watched the Mercedes drive away, its tires spraying dirty slush. He climbed into his truck, hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The folder of unpaid bills seemed to burn in his jacket pocket. The day passed in a blur of leaky faucets and loose cabinet doors. Evan worked efficiently, charging less than he should because he knew his elderly clients lived on fixed incomes. Mrs. Henderson tried to tip him with cookie tins, and Mr. Rodriguez insisted on paying extra for fixing his furnace. But Evan couldn't bring himself to take more than his quoted price. By evening, his back ached and his hands were rough from work, but he managed to get home in time to make dinner. Their small apartment kitchen was warm and bright as he and Libby sat down to eat mac and cheese with hot dogs, her favorite comfort food. "How was school, sweetheart?" "Good. I got an A on my science project." Libby twirled her fork in the cheese sauce. "Miss Thompson said my presentation on the water cycle was the best in class." "That's my girl." Evan smiled, though his heart hurt, knowing how hard she worked with their limited resources. The project materials had come from the dollar store, but Libby had turned them into something special. "Dad?" She looked up, suddenly serious. "Jenny invited me to her birthday party next weekend. It's at the indoor water park." "Oh." Evan focused on his plate, knowing the admission fee would be far beyond their means. "We'll have to see about that, okay?" Libby nodded, already used to such answers. It's okay. Maybe we can do something else instead? Absolutely. He reached across to squeeze her hand. Maybe we can rent a movie and make popcorn? Her smile, though slightly dimmed, was genuine. Can we get butter flavor? You bet. After dinner and homework, Libby went to bed with a hug and an "I love you, Dad" that nearly broke him. Evan sat at the kitchen table, spreading out bills in neat piles under the flickering fluorescent light. Electric past due. Water warning notice. Final notice from the gas company. And rent. So much overdue rent. He pulled out his wallet, counting the day's earnings. $68. Not even enough to cover the electric bill, let alone make a dent in what they owed Patterson. The classified section of the newspaper lay open beside him, apartment listings circled in red. Everything in their price range was in neighborhoods he'd promised himself Libby would never have to live in. Evan stared at the numbers that refused to add up differently, no matter how many times he rearranged them. The cheaper apartments would mean longer bus rides for Libby, probably a different school. They'd have to sell furniture that wouldn't fit in a smaller place. But what choice did he have? The kitchen clock ticked steadily as Evan sorted the bills one more time, his calloused hands gentle with the worn papers, as if careful handling might somehow change what they demanded of him. Evan sat at his worn kitchen table, sorting through another pile of bills in the weak afternoon light. The space heater hummed in the corner, fighting against drafts that sneaked through the apartment's thin walls. A pot of soup simmered on the stove, enough to stretch for 2 more dinners if he was careful. The sharp rap at the door made him jump. He wasn't expecting anyone, and bill collectors usually came earlier in the day. Through the peephole, he saw Grace Alvarez standing on his weather-beaten porch, looking nervous but determined. Noah bounced beside her, wearing a bright red coat that made him look like a cheerful cardinal against the gray day. But it was the third person that gave Evan pause, a tall man in an expensive charcoal suit holding a leather briefcase. The kind of person who usually didn't venture into this part of town? Evan opened the door, immediately conscious of his faded jeans and the paint stains on his work shirt. "Mrs. Alvarez, is everything all right?" "Please, call me Grace," she said softly. Her dark eyes held a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. "I hope we're not interrupting anything." Noah waved enthusiastically. "Hi, Mr. Evan. Remember us from the snow day?" "Of course I do, buddy." Evan smiled at the boy, then gestured to his humble living room. "Would you like to come in? I can make some coffee." The man in the suit stepped forward, extending his hand. Thomas Crawford, estate manager for Sterling Whitaker. His handshake was firm, professional. "Mr. Whitaker was quite moved when he heard about your assistance to Mrs. Alvarez and her son during the storm." Evan shook his head. "Anyone would have done the same. It wasn't anything special." "On the contrary." Grace spoke up, her voice gentle but firm. "You missed work to help us. You wouldn't take any money for the tow truck or breakfast. Most people would have just driven by." "Mr. Whitaker believes in recognizing acts of kindness," Crawford continued, reaching into his briefcase. He withdrew a deep burgundy velvet pouch that clinked softly as he handed it to Evan. "He has a proposition for you." Evan's fingers trembled slightly as he loosened the pouch's drawstring. Inside were 3 large brass keys, obviously old but well-maintained, their surfaces catching the dim light from his apartment windows. "I don't understand," he said, looking between Grace and Crawford. Grace stepped closer, her hands clasped together. "Mr. Whitaker has a guest house on his estate. It's been empty for years, a beautiful old place, but it needs some work." She paused, watching Evan's face carefully. "He'd like to offer it to you and your daughter, rent-free, if you're willing to fix it up while you live there." Evan stared at the keys in his palm. They felt heavy with possibility and responsibility. That's too generous. I can't accept." "Dad?" Libby appeared in the hallway, home from school. She looked curiously at their visitors. "What's going on?" Noah broke away from his mother and ran to Libby. "Hi, I'm Noah. Your dad's a hero. He saved me and my mom." Libby smiled, but looked questioningly at her father. Evan felt the weight of both children's gazes, along with the brass keys in his hand. He thought about the stack of bills on the table, the broken heater, the notice from the landlord. Crawford cleared his throat. "The offer includes utilities, Mr. Brooks. Mr. Whitaker understands you're a skilled handyman. The repairs would be done at your own pace, as you're able. There's no catch, just his wish to help someone who helped others, without expecting anything in return." "The grounds are beautiful," Grace added softly. "There's a garden, space for the children to play safely. Good schools nearby." She hesitated, then continued, "And I'm there often, as I work at the main house. I could help show you around, get you settled." Evan looked around his small apartment. The water stain on the ceiling, the cramped kitchen, the second-hand furniture. He thought of Libby doing homework by flashlight during power outages, of promising her things would get better someday. "Could we see it first?" he asked carefully. Crawford nodded, pulling out his phone. "I can have someone show you the property tomorrow morning, if that works for you." "Yes, yes," Noah tugged at Evan's sleeve. "You have to come. You're our rescue hero." The boy's enthusiasm brought a genuine smile to Evan's face. He knelt down to Noah's level. "I just did what anyone should do, buddy, but thank you." "But you didn't just drive by," Noah insisted, wrapping his arms around Evan in an impulsive hug. "You're a rescue hero, and now you can live near us." Grace's eyes met Evan's over her son's head, and he saw something warm and grateful in her smile. "The house needs someone to care for it," she said quietly. "Someone who knows the value of helping others, like you did for us." Evan stood, the keys warm in his hand, feeling the weight of this moment. It seemed impossible, too good to be true, but the earnest faces around him spoke of something real, something that could change everything. "Then I suppose we should take a look at this guest house," he said finally, and Noah whooped with joy. The estate manager handed Evan a business card with tomorrow's appointment time written on the back. Grace's smile grew wider, lighting up her whole face in a way that made Evan's heart skip a beat. "Welcome to Whitaker Estate, Mr. Brooks," Crawford said formally. "We'll see you in the morning." Noah gave Evan one more quick hug. "Rescue hero," he whispered again, beaming, before taking his mother's hand. As they left, Grace turned back one last time. "Thank you for showing us that kindness still exists in the world, Evan. Sometimes a simple act of helping others can lead to wonderful things." The iron gates of the Whitaker estate loomed before them, intricate scrollwork catching the morning sun. Evan's old pickup truck seemed impossibly out of place as he pulled up to the security booth, Libby practically bouncing in the passenger seat beside him. "Name?" The guard's expression remained neutral as he checked a clipboard. "Evan Brooks. We're, here about the guest house?" He handed over the brass keys tied with their velvet ribbon. The guard nodded and pressed a button. The gates swung open with barely a whisper, revealing a winding driveway lined with bare winter trees. Libby pressed her face against the window as they drove past perfectly maintained gardens and sculpted hedges. "Dad, look, it's like a castle." She pointed to the main house rising ahead of them, a massive stone mansion with tall windows and ivy-covered walls. "Remember what we talked about, sweetheart? We're here to fix up the guest house, not the main house. And we need to be respectful. This is someone else's home." They followed the curve of the drive to a smaller building set apart from the mansion. Though modest compared to the main house, the guest house was still larger than any place they'd ever lived. Built in the same gray stone, it had a steep roof, dormer windows, and a small covered porch. As they parked, Evan noticed several staff members watching from the main house's windows. A gardener paused in his pruning to stare openly at their loaded truck. "Come on, Libby girl, let's check out our new place." Evan grabbed their first box and headed for the porch steps. Inside, sheets draped the furniture like ghosts. Dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through tall windows. The floors were solid hardwood beneath their feet, and though everything needed a good cleaning, Evan's experienced eye noted the sturdy bones of the place. "It's perfect, Dad." Libby spun in circles in the empty living room, her voice echoing slightly. "Hold that thought until we've seen everything, kiddo." But Evan had to admit, even dusty and abandoned, this place had potential. They were examining the kitchen's dated but functional appliances when crisp footsteps approached from outside. A woman appeared in the doorway, her gray hair perfectly styled and her wool coat impeccably tailored. Her sharp eyes took in every detail of their appearance. "Mr. Brooks, I presume?" Her tone was cool, but not quite unfriendly. "I'm Eleanor Whitaker, Sterling's sister. I hope you'll forgive my direct approach, but I need to understand your situation." Evan straightened, recognizing the familiar dance of someone trying to size him up. "Of course, ma'am. What would you like to know? How long have you known Grace Alvarez?" Eleanor's gaze was steady, probing. "Just met her a few days ago when her van broke down. Helped her and Noah get somewhere warm until their ride came. And you have no prior connection to the Whitaker family?" "No, ma'am. Never had reason to cross paths before now." Eleanor's eyes flickered to Libby, who had stopped exploring to watch the exchange. "You're a school bus driver, correct? And you do Handyman work? Yes, ma'am. Licensed and insured for both. I can provide references from my clients if you'd like. That won't be necessary. Yet. Eleanor pulled a business card from her pocket. I handle many of my brother's legal affairs, if there are any issues. Please contact me directly rather than bothering Sterling. Evan accepted the card with a nod. Appreciate that, ma'am, but I'm just here to fix up the guest house, like Mr. Whitaker asked. Nothing more complicated than that. We'll see. Eleanor's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Welcome to the estate, Mr. Brooks. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking precisely on the wooden floors. Evan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Libby tugged at his sleeve. Dad, is that lady mad at us? No, sweetie. She's just being careful about who lives on her family's property. Can't blame her for that. He ruffled her hair. Come on, let's get the rest of our boxes. They made several trips back and forth from the truck. The few pieces of furniture they owned seemed almost laughably small in the spacious rooms, but Evan reminded himself this was temporary, just until he could fix the place up. As they carried in the last box, Grace passed by with a large basket of laundry balanced on her hip. She glanced around quickly before stepping closer. Mr. Brooks, she said softly, I should warn you, not everyone here is happy about this arrangement. Be careful, okay? Before Evan could respond, she hurried away toward the main house, leaving him standing on the porch with the box in his arms, watching her disappear around the corner. Evan wiped sweat from his forehead despite the winter chill, his breath visible in the cold air as he worked on the guest house's weathered porch. The old wood had good bones, but years of neglect had left their mark. He carefully sanded down rough patches, prepping them for a fresh coat of paint. From inside, children's laughter drifted through the windows. Libby and Noah had spread their homework across the living room floor, math worksheets forgotten in favor of creating elaborate paper airplanes. The sound made Evan smile. It had been too long since their old apartment had rung with such joy. Mr. Brooks, Noah's small voice called out, can we test our planes outside? Sure thing, buddy. Just bundle up first. It's cold out here. Minutes later, the kids burst through the door in mismatched winter gear, their cheeks already pink from excitement. Libby helped Noah zip up his coat properly before they began launching their paper creations into the crisp afternoon air. Higher! Make it go higher! Noah jumped up and down as Libby demonstrated her superior folding technique. Grace appeared around the corner of the house, carrying a basket of laundry. She paused, watching the children play with a soft expression that quickly turned guarded when she noticed Evan observing her. Noah, honey, don't forget you have reading time in 20 minutes, she reminded gently. But Mom, we're just getting started with the good planes, Noah protested, clutching his latest creation. Tell you what, Evan offered, setting down his sandpaper. How about you both read for a bit, and then we can try launching these again before dinner? The compromise worked its magic. Noah brightened and scampered inside, Libby following with an understanding smile that made Evan's heart swell with pride. Grace shifted the laundry basket to her hip. You're good with him, she said quietly. He talks about you constantly at home now. He's a great kid. Evan returned to his sanding, trying to keep his tone casual. Libby's thrilled to have someone to play with. A car drove slowly past the guest house, the occupants clearly staring. Grace's shoulders tensed. The town's talking, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, about why Mr. Whitaker would let a bus driver live here. Let them talk. Evan shrugged, though the words stung. I've got work to do. And work he did. Through the week, Evan settled into a rhythm, driving his morning bus route, doing handyman jobs around town, then returning to tackle the guest house repairs. He replaced broken shingles, fixed leaky pipes, and slowly transformed the tired building into something welcoming. But the whispers followed. At the grocery store, conversations would halt when he walked past. At the hardware store, the owner's wife watched him with narrowed eyes as she rang up his purchases. Must be nice, she remarked one day. Getting cozy with the Whitakers. Evan met her gaze steadily. Just fixing up an old house, ma'am. Nothing more to it than that. He noticed Grace faced similar scrutiny. The other household staff kept their distance, and she spent more time in the private areas of the mansion. When their paths crossed, she seemed increasingly worried, though she tried to hide it behind professional courtesy. Thursday afternoon brought another encounter. Evan was on a ladder, checking the gutters, when Eleanor Whitaker's sleek car pulled up. Sterling's sister stepped out, her designer boots crunching on the gravel. Mr. Brooks, she called up to him. A moment? Evan climbed down carefully, wiping his hands on his jeans. Yes, ma'am? I trust you're finding everything satisfactory? Her tone suggested she expected complaints. Very much so. The structure's solid, just needs some TLC. Eleanor studied him with sharp eyes. Indeed, my brother has always had a charitable streak, though usually not quite so personal. Evan kept his voice even. I'm grateful for the opportunity to provide a better home for my daughter. Eleanor's lips thinned. Well, do remember, this is still Whitaker property. We have standards to maintain. She departed with a meaningful glance at his mud-splattered work boots and paint-stained shirt. Evan watched her go, then returned to his work with renewed determination. Saturday morning brought a surprise. Grace approached while Evan was touching up the porch paint, her work uniform exchanged for a simple sweater and slacks. Mr. Whitaker is hosting a small charity reception this evening, she said, twisting her hands together. He'd like you and Libby to attend, to meet properly. Evan straightened, caught off guard. I'm not really dressed for. Just business casual is fine. Grace assured him quickly. It's only a few donors and local board members. Mr. Whitaker insists. She paused, adding softly, I'll be there too, with Noah. Evan glanced down at his paint-spotted clothes, then at the half-finished porch. What time? 7 o'clock in the main house. Grace's eyes held a hint of warmth. Noah will be happy to see Libby there. As she walked away, Evan realized he was smiling despite his nervousness. He called Libby outside to help him finish the porch. They had a reception to prepare for. The Whitaker mansion glowed against the darkening winter sky, its windows casting warm light onto the snow-dusted lawn. Evan adjusted his tie, borrowed from his army days, and glanced down at Libby in her best blue dress. Remember what we talked about, sweetheart? He asked softly. Best behavior, Dad. I know. Libby smoothed her dress, looking more grown-up than her 10 years. They followed a small crowd through the grand entrance, where crystal chandeliers cast dancing lights across marble floors. The reception space opened into a high-ceilinged room where classical music played softly, and well-dressed guests mingled over champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvre. Evan spotted Grace immediately. She wore a simple black dress that made her look elegant despite her obvious discomfort. Noah fidgeted beside her in a miniature suit, tugging at his collar, while Grace straightened it for the 100th time. Libby, Evan! Noah's face lit up when he saw them, but Grace held him back with a gentle hand on his shoulder. Sterling Whitaker stood near the center of the room, commanding attention without effort. His silver hair and perfectly tailored suit spoke of old money and influence. When he turned toward Evan, his expression was pleasant but reserved. Mr. Brooks, Sterling extended his hand. Welcome to my home. I trust the guest house is meeting your needs? Yes, sir. Very generous of you. Evan shook his hand firmly but briefly. This is my daughter, Libby. Sterling nodded to Libby with the same measured politeness. Charmed. The refreshments are there. He gestured to a long table. Please, make yourselves comfortable. Grace appeared at Sterling's elbow with paperwork that needed his attention, her movements efficient and professional. Noah stayed close to his mother, but his eyes darted around the room with mounting restlessness. The next hour passed in a blur of polite small talk. Evan noticed how some guests watched Grace with barely concealed curiosity, whispering behind their hands. Others seemed to look right through her as if she were part of the furniture. Grace kept her chin up, but her shoulders were tense as she moved through the crowd with practiced invisibility. Libby had found a corner with some board games, entertaining Noah while keeping an eye on the adults. Evan circulated carefully, thanking those who welcomed him while deflecting questions about his arrangement with the Whitakers. Then suddenly, Noah wasn't by the games anymore. Grace noticed first, her head snapping up from where she was arranging coffee service. Her eyes scanned the room with rising panic until they locked onto a small figure weaving through the forest of adult legs. Noah had made his way to Sterling, who was deep in conversation with what appeared to be important donors. Before anyone could intercept him, Noah tugged on Sterling's pant leg. The businessman looked down, momentarily startled. Something softened in his face, perhaps the natural response of any adult to a child's innocent approach. He bent slightly, probably expecting a simple question about the bathroom or the dessert table. Instead, Noah raised his arms in the universal childhood gesture of, "Pick me up." Sterling, caught off guard in front of his guests, automatically lifted the boy. Noah's small hands settled on Sterling's shoulders as he leaned in close to the man's ear. The room hadn't exactly gone quiet, but there was that subtle shift in atmosphere when something unexpected draws collective attention. Noah's whisper carried with the peculiar acoustics that children's voices sometimes have, clear as a bell and twice as innocent. "Mommy says you're my daddy." The effect was immediate and devastating. Sterling's face went slack with shock, his usual composure cracking like thin ice. The crystal glass in his free hand trembled slightly, but didn't fall. Grace stood frozen by the coffee service, color draining from her face until she looked almost gray. The silver coffee pot she held clicked quietly against its tray as her hands began to shake. Whispers erupted like a sudden wind through autumn leaves. Phones appeared as if by magic, their camera flashes punctuating the moment with harsh white light. Evan moved without thinking, his protective instincts taking over. He stepped between the cameras and Grace, his broad shoulders creating a barrier. In 3 long strides, he reached Sterling and Noah, positioning himself to block more photos. "Here, let me take him," Evan said quietly, his voice steady despite the chaos building around them. Noah came to him willingly, innocent of the storm he'd just unleashed. But it was too late to contain the moment. The damage was done. Phones were already lowering as their owners bent together in urgent conversation. The whispers grew louder, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. "Did you hear what that child said? The housekeeper's son. Sterling Whitaker and the maid? No wonder she got the position." Sterling remained motionless, his usual commanding presence shattered by 6 simple words from a child's lips. The perfect polish of the evening had cracked, revealing something raw and human underneath the carefully maintained veneer of wealth and propriety. The evening air bit cold and sharp as Evan paced the guesthouse porch. His mind kept replaying the moment, Noah's innocent voice, Sterling's frozen expression, the terrible silence that followed. Through the window, he could see Libby reading to Noah in the living room, both children mercifully unaware of the storm brewing around them. A soft knock made him turn. Grace stood there, arms wrapped tight around herself, her black dress now hidden under a worn cardigan. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she trembled slightly in the winter night. "Can we talk?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. Evan nodded, gesturing to the porch swing he'd fixed last week. They sat, leaving careful space between them as the swing creaked gently. "I'm so sorry," Grace began, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "I never meant for this to happen. Never." She pressed her hands to her face, shoulders shaking. Evan waited, giving her time to collect herself. Inside, Noah's laugh rang out at something in the story Libby was reading. "It was just one time," Grace continued, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. "Noah was asking about his father, like he sometimes does. It was bedtime, and I was tired, and lonely, and—" She drew a shuddering breath. "I told him a story about a hardworking man who lived in a big house. I mentioned Sterling's name, just once. I thought he was already asleep." The swing squeaked as Evan shifted. "Kids hear everything, don't they?" Grace nodded miserably. "I should have been more careful. Noah's been watching Sterling ever since, trying to figure things out in his own way. I never imagined he'd just blurt it out like that." "Is it true?" Evan asked quietly, not judging, just needing to understand. Grace's fingers twisted in her lap. "Yes," she whispered. "It was years ago, before Noah. I'd just started working here. Sterling was different then. Kinder, less distant." She looked up at Evan, her eyes pleading. "We kept it quiet. When I told him I was pregnant, he made it clear his position, his reputation, came first. I never asked him for anything. The job was enough to support us." A gust of wind rattled the porch railings. Evan pulled his jacket tighter, thinking carefully before he spoke. "This won't stay quiet now," he said gently. "Those party guests had phones. Someone probably took pictures. In a town this size, news travels fast." "I know." Grace's voice cracked. "I could lose everything, my job, our home, Noah." Fresh tears spilled. "What if they try to take him away?" "Hey!" Evan turned to face her fully. "That's not going to happen. Nobody's taking Noah anywhere." "You don't know these people, Evan. The lawyers, the money, the power they have." "Maybe not," he agreed. "But I know right from wrong. And I know that boy needs his mother." He paused, choosing his words with care. "Whatever happens next, you're not alone in this. Libby and I, we're here." Grace looked at him through tear-filled eyes, seeming to search for something in his face. "Why?" she asked softly. "You barely know us. This mess isn't your problem." "Because it's what decent folks do," Evan said simply. "They help when help's needed." A sob caught in Grace's throat. and she pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle it. Evan wanted to comfort her but kept his distance, aware of how vulnerable she was in this moment. Through the window, they could hear Libby finishing the bedtime story, Noah's sleepy questions growing fewer and farther between. "I should get him to bed," Grace said finally, standing up. She smoothed her cardigan with trembling hands. "Thank you, Evan, for listening, for everything." He nodded, rising too. "Try to get some rest. Whatever comes tomorrow, we'll face it then." Grace gathered Noah, who was already half asleep, into her arms. Evan watched them disappear into the darkness toward the main house, their figures small against its looming facade. The next morning dawned gray and cold. Evan was up early, checking the guest house's ancient furnace, when he noticed the cars. 3 black sedans with tinted windows pulled up the mansion's circular drive, their polished surfaces gleaming dully in the winter light. Men in expensive suits emerged, carrying leather briefcases. Lawyers, Evan knew instantly, his stomach tightening. He watched through the window as they were ushered inside. 10 minutes later, his phone buzzed with a text from Grace. "They want to see me now." He texted back immediately. "Want me to come with you?" There was a long pause before her reply appeared. "Better not. Need to handle this myself. Please watch Noah. He's still sleeping." Evan stared at the mansion's imposing silhouette, feeling helpless. "Of course," he wrote back. "We're here if you need us." The sound of another car crunching on gravel made him look up. A 4th sedan was arriving, and from it stepped Eleanor Whitaker, her expression as sharp as the winter wind that whipped at her coat. The storm was beginning. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the guest house lawn as Evan worked on replacing loose shingles. His muscles ached from the morning school bus route, and now this. But the physical labor helped quiet his mind after last night's events. The crunch of gravel made him pause. Grace walked up the path, her shoulders tense beneath her housekeeper's uniform. "Got a minute?" she called up softly. Evan carefully made his way down the ladder. "Of course." He wiped his hands on his work jeans and led her to the newly painted porch steps. Grace sat, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. "The lawyers were here all morning." Her voice was steady but thin. "Sterling says. He says he doesn't remember our relationship, claims it never happened." Evan's jaw tightened, but he kept silent, letting her speak. "I worked at his Houston office just for 3 months before moving here." Grace stared at her clasped hands. "It wasn't. I'm not proud of it. But Noah is his. I've never been with anyone else." "I believe you," Evan said simply. Grace's eyes glistened. "They want to do a DNA test. Private lab, very discreet." Sterling agreed to that much, at least. She pulled a tissue from her pocket, dabbing at her eyes. But his lawyers made it clear. No press, no gossip. They're already working to contain last night's incident. "And Noah?" Evan asked gently. "He's with the nanny. Doesn't understand why everyone's acting so strange." Grace's voice cracked. "The lawyers said they'll handle everything through proper channels. But they also..." She hesitated. "What is it?" "They told me to warn you. Said you shouldn't get involved, that your housing arrangement could be complicated if there's any more drama." Evan stood, pacing the porch. Anger rose in his chest, not for himself, but for the quiet dignity in Grace's voice, even as these people threatened her livelihood. "They can't just brush this under the rug. Noah deserves..." "Please," Grace cut in. "I can't ask you to risk your place here. You and Libby need this home." "We've managed before," Evan said quietly. "We'll manage again if we have to." Grace shook her head. "This isn't your fight, Evan. The lawyers were very clear. They'll handle everything through the proper legal channels. No fuss, no public spectacle." She stood, straightening her uniform. "I should get back. Mrs. Eleanor wants the silver polished before dinner." Evan watched her walk away, her back straight despite everything. The sound of children's laughter drifted from inside the mansion. Noah and Libby playing somewhere in those grand rooms. His daughter had taken to the boy immediately, protective and kind like always. Later that afternoon, as Evan walked Libby home from her piano lesson in town, his mind churned with everything Grace had said. The threat to their housing was clear enough, but something in him rebelled at staying quiet while a little boy's future hung in the balance. "Dad?" Libby tugged his sleeve. "You're thinking really loud again." Evan managed to smile. "Just grown-up stuff, sweetheart." "About Noah and his mom?" Libby kicked a stone along the path. "I heard some kids at school talking. They said mean things." Evan stopped, kneeling to meet his daughter's eyes. People sometimes say unkind things when they don't understand a situation. What matters is being there for our friends when they need us. Libby nodded solemnly. Noah's scared. He thinks everyone's mad at him for what he said. None of this is his fault, Evan said firmly. Sometimes adults make things complicated when they should be simple. They walked the rest of the way in companionable silence. Evan's mind was made up. He wouldn't go looking for trouble or make public waves, but he wouldn't abandon Grace and Noah either. If things got ugly, they'd face it together, housing agreement or not. Some things mattered more than a roof over your head. As they reached the guest house, Libby ran ahead to feed the stray cat she'd been caring for. Evan paused on the path, looking up at the mansion's imposing windows. Somewhere inside, lawyers and wealthy people were deciding a child's fate in careful, sanitized terms. But out here, in the cold afternoon air, a simple truth remained. Every kid deserved to know where they came from, and every parent deserved a chance to fight for their child's future. The middle. The whispers followed Grace through the grocery store aisles like a persistent shadow. Mrs. Henderson, who usually chatted about recipes, suddenly found the cereal boxes fascinating. The checkout girl barely met her eyes. Grace clutched her shopping basket tighter, the plastic handles digging into her palm. She reached for a loaf of bread just as another shopper yanked her cart backward, avoiding contact as if Grace carried something contagious. Did you hear? A stage whisper carried from the next aisle. The housekeeper and Mr. Whitaker. Grace abandoned her half-filled basket near the dairy section and hurried out, eyes burning. In the parking lot, she nearly collided with Evan, who was loading lumber into his truck. Grace. His voice was gentle. You okay? She wiped quickly at her eyes. Fine, just people talk too much in this town. Evan studied her face, then glanced at her empty hands. Where are your groceries? I'll go back later. She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. No need. Evan's voice was firm but kind. I'm heading to Mr. Martinez's house, building a wheelchair ramp for him. He's a Vietnam vet who could use some help getting in and out of his house. Why don't you and Noah come along? Libby's bringing sandwiches. Grace hesitated. I don't know anything about building. You can hand me nails. Evan's eyes crinkled at the corners. Besides, Mr. Martinez makes the best lemonade in town. An hour later, Noah was carefully holding a level while Libby showed him how bubbles needed to stay between the lines. Grace passed tools to Evan, who explained each step as he worked. The fresh air and physical labor felt like medicine after the morning's humiliation. Mr. Martinez sat in his wheelchair on the porch, telling stories about his service days that had Noah wide-eyed with wonder. His wife brought out cookies and the promised lemonade. My Albert hasn't been able to use the front door in months, Mrs. Martinez said, watching the ramp take shape. This is such a blessing. Grace helped Libby measure boards while Noah collected screws that had scattered in the grass. The sun warmed their backs as they worked, and Grace felt the knot in her chest slowly loosening. You're a natural, Evan said as Grace perfectly aligned two boards. She felt a small spark of pride. By late afternoon, the ramp was complete. Mr. Martinez rolled down it smoothly, grinning like a teenager. Freedom, he declared, making Noah giggle. This is what community means, Mrs. Martinez said, hugging each of them. Not gossip, not judgment, just neighbors helping neighbors. That evening, Grace cooked dinner for both families in the guest house kitchen. The children played card games while the adults talked about other seniors who might need help. Evan had a list from the church. Pastor Ruth mentioned the Wilson sisters need their gutters cleaned, he said. And Mrs. Chin's porch steps are wobbly. I could help with that, Grace said. I'm good at organizing projects. Team effort, Evan nodded, smiling. The next day, they tackled the Wilson sisters' gutters. The day after, they fixed Mrs. Chin's steps. Word spread differently now, not as gossip, but as gratitude. By Sunday, when they slipped into the back pew at church, Pastor Ruth was already speaking about service. This week, I witnessed something beautiful, she said, her warm voice filling the sanctuary. I saw what happens when people choose kindness over judgment, action over speculation. She gestured to where they sat. Evan Brooks and Grace Alvarez, along with their wonderful children, have been quiet angels in our community. They've built ramps, repaired homes, and shown us what it means to be good neighbors. Grace felt her cheeks warm as several heads turned their way, but these looks were different from the grocery store stares. She saw smiles, nods of appreciation. When we serve others, Pastor Ruth continued, We build more than ramps and steps. We build bridges between hearts. We repair more than houses. We heal communities. Noah leaned against Grace's side, drowsy from the morning's activity. Libby beamed from her spot between them. Evan caught Grace's eye and gave a slight nod. For the first time in days, Grace felt something settle in her chest, not the weight of judgment, but the warmth of belonging. After the service, several congregation members approached them with offers to help on future projects. Mrs. Chin had brought homemade dumplings. The Wilson sisters pressed cookies into the children's hands. Pastor Ruth made her way through the crowd to them. "Thank you," she said simply, squeezing Grace's hand. "You've reminded us what matters most." The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows, painting the church floor in rainbow colors. Noah chased the light patterns while Libby showed him how to make shadow puppets. Their laughter echoed in the sacred space, a different kind of hymn. The grandfather clock in Sterling Whitaker's library chimed 3 times as Evan stepped into the book-lined room. Afternoon sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across Persian rugs and leather chairs that probably cost more than his truck. Sterling stood by a marble fireplace, his silver hair catching the light. He didn't turn immediately, instead studying a family portrait above the mantel. "Please, sit," he said, gesturing to one of the wing chairs without looking away from the painting. Evan lowered himself onto the butter-soft leather, feeling out of place in his work jeans and flannel shirt. He noticed a thin layer of dust on his boots and tried to tuck them under the chair. Sterling finally turned, his expression unreadable. He settled into the opposite chair with practiced grace. "I appreciate you coming on such short notice, Mr. Brooks." "Just Evan is fine, sir." "Very well, Evan." Sterling's steel-gray eyes fixed on him. "You've spent some time around Ms. Alvarez since moving to the guest house." It wasn't quite a question, but Evan nodded. "Yes, sir." "What's your impression of her?" Evan chose his words carefully. "She's hard-working, devoted to her son, takes pride in doing things right." "And this situation with Noah?" Sterling's fingers drummed once on the armrest. "Do you believe she orchestrated it?" Heat rose in Evan's chest. "No, sir, I don't." "You seem quite certain." "I am." Evan sat straighter. "Grace Sims. Alvarez, he's not calculating like that. Noah's an observant kid who overheard something and spoke up at the wrong moment. That's all." Sterling studied him for a long moment. "You defend her rather passionately." "Because she deserves defending." Evan met the older man's gaze steadily. "Sir, I've known people who work angles for money. Grace isn't one of them." She was mortified by what happened at the reception. "Yet she's never mentioned possibilities to me before." "Maybe she was afraid." Evan gestured to the grand room around them. "This is intimidating. You're intimidating. And she's a single mom trying to protect her son while keeping a job she needs." Sterling's eyebrows rose slightly at Evan's directness. "I mean no disrespect," Evan added, "but Grace strikes me as someone who's learned to keep her head down and handle things alone, not someone looking to cause trouble." "And you base this assessment on what? A few weeks of neighborly interaction? On watching how she treats others, how she carries herself, the way she's raising Noah to be honest and kind?" Evan leaned forward. "Sir, when I helped them with their van that morning, she tried 3 times to pay me back for breakfast. A schemer wouldn't have done that." Sterling walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. Snow had started falling outside, fat flakes drifting past the glass. "Your daughter Libby, correct? She plays with Noah sometimes?" "Yes, sir. They've become friends." "And what does Noah say about me?" Evan heard the carefully hidden vulnerability in the question. "He says you're always nice to him, that you let him play with the model trains in your study sometime." Sterling's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. After a long pause, he turned back to Evan. "I've arranged for discrete DNA testing this Wednesday. The results should put this matter to rest, one way or another." "That seems fair," Evan said carefully. "Ms. Alvarez has already agreed." Sterling returned to his chair. "I trust you'll continue your repairs on the guest house in the meantime?" Evan recognized the dismissal. "Yes, sir. Thank you." He stood and headed for the door, but Sterling's voice stopped him. "Mr. Brooks?" "Sir?" "Thank you for your candid assessment." Evan nodded and left the library. Outside, the snow was coming down harder, already coating the gravel drive. He walked slowly toward the guest house, his boots leaving deep prints in the fresh powder. Why did he care so much about what happened to Grace? The question nagged at him with each crunching step. She was just a neighbor, just another person who needed help sometimes, like the veterans he built ramps for or the elderly folks whose gutters he cleaned. But something about her quiet dignity, her fierce love for Noah, the way she shouldered her burdens alone, it stirred something protective in him, something that made him want to stand between her and the world's harsh judgments. The snow fell silently around him as he walked home through the gathering dusk. The late winter sun cast long shadows across the guest house's worn floorboards as Grace sat at the kitchen table, a cream-colored envelope resting before her like a ticking clock. Her work uniform was still crisp from her morning shift, but her fingers trembled as they traced the laboratory's official seal. Evan stood by the sink, trying to look busy washing the few dishes there while giving her space. He'd stopped by to fix a leaky faucet, but Grace had asked him to stay when the courier arrived with the results. Now, the only sound was the slow drip of water he hadn't yet repaired. Noah played outside with Libby, their laughter drifting through the window as they built a snowman. The sound seemed to give Grace strength. She took a deep breath and slid her finger under the envelope's flap. "I don't know why I'm so nervous," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've always known the truth." Evan dried his hands on a dish towel. "Sometimes having proof makes things more real. That can be scary." Grace nodded, pulling out the crisp white papers. Her dark eyes moved quickly across the text, scientific terms and percentages that would change everything. The paper rustled as her hands began to shake harder. "It's positive," she said. 99.99% probability. She set the papers down carefully, as if they might burn her fingers. "Sterling Whitaker is Noah's father." Evan pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. The old wood creaked under his weight. "Are you okay?" Grace pressed her palms flat against the table, steadying herself. "I should feel relieved. This is what I wanted, proof that I wasn't lying." She looked out the window at Noah, who was now showing Libby how to make a snow angel. "But proof doesn't guarantee anything, does it? It won't make him want to be a father." "No," Evan agreed quietly, "but it's a start. It's the truth, and that counts for something." Grace gathered the papers together, squaring their edges with precise movements. "Sterling's lawyers will want to see these right away. They'll probably have more papers for me to sign, more meetings about keeping things quiet." Her voice took on a bitter edge. "As if I'm the one who needs to be managed." "You don't have to sign anything you're not comfortable with," Evan reminded her. "Maybe talk to Pastor Ruth first? She knows some good lawyers who work with families." Grace's eyes met his, filled with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. "Why are you always so kind to us, Evan? You barely know me, but you're here, waiting with me for life-changing news like we're." She trailed off, looking away. "Like we're friends?" Evan finished. "Because we are. Or at least I'd like to think we are." A small smile touched Grace's lips. "Friends?" she repeated softly. "I haven't had many of those since Noah was born. Most people hear single mother and housekeeper and make up their minds about who I am." "Their loss," Evan said simply. The children's laughter grew louder as they raced past the window, faces flushed with cold and joy. Grace watched them, her expression softening. "Noah loves it here. He's never had a friend like Libby before. I worry about what will happen if—" She didn't finish the thought. She didn't have to. The weight of uncertainty hung in the air between them. The afternoon light was fading when they heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Grace stood and peered out the window. "It's Sterling's car." Evan rose too, gathering his tools. "I should go." "No," Grace said quickly. "Please, would you mind staying, just in the other room? I know it's asking a lot, but—" "I'll finish fixing that faucet," Evan said, understanding what she wasn't saying. She wanted a witness, someone nearby, just in case. Grace smoothed her uniform and opened the door before Sterling could knock. The billionaire stood there in an expensive overcoat, his face unreadable. "May I come in?" Grace stepped aside, and Sterling entered, his tall frame making the modest room feel smaller. His eyes fell on the papers on the table, then moved to Evan. "Mr. Brooks," he said with a slight nod. "I trust that faucet is giving you trouble?" "Just finishing up, sir," Evan replied, moving toward the small bathroom. He left the door partially open as he worked, the metal tools clinking quietly against the pipes. Through the thin wall, he could hear Sterling's measured footsteps, the scrape of a chair being pulled out. Then Sterling's voice, softer than Evan had ever heard it. "I owe you an apology, Grace. Several, in fact." There was a pause, filled only by the sound of water dripping slowly into Evan's bucket. I remember that summer, Sterling continued. You were temping in my office while your aunt was ill. I was less careful with people's feelings back then, less aware of the consequences of my actions. I never asked you for anything. Grace's voice was steady. I still wouldn't if Noah hadn't. I know, that's part of what shames me. You carried this alone for 6 years Sterling's voice caught slightly, while I pretended not to see what was right in front of me. A boy with my father's eyes. Evan focused intently on the faucet, trying not to listen while unable to help hearing. The wrench slipped in his hands, clanking against the pipe. What happens now? Grace asked. Whatever you want to happen, Sterling replied. I've instructed my lawyers to draw up papers acknowledging Noah as my son. There will be provisions for his future, education, healthcare, whatever he needs. But I won't force my way into his life if you don't want me there. He needs a father, Grace said softly, but he needs one who wants to be there, not one who feels obligated. I'd like to try. Sterling's voice was rough with emotion. To be there, to know him, to make up for lost time, if you'll let me. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of years, of choices made and unmade. Evan tightened the last bolt on the faucet, testing it gently. The drip had stopped. The mansion's music hall glowed with warmth on this early spring evening. Crystal chandeliers cast soft light over polished wooden floors and elegant wall panels. Local families filled the rows of chairs, their Sunday best, a colorful mix against the room's cream and gold tones. Evan adjusted his choir robe in the back, watching Libby and Noah sitting together in the front row. Grace stood nearby, wearing a simple blue dress instead of her usual uniform, her hands clasped tightly together. The past weeks had changed things. The DNA results, private meetings with lawyers, whispered conversations. But tonight felt different. Pastor Ruth gathered the choir members, their familiar faces now friends after weeks of practice. Remember, she whispered, music heals hearts. They took their places on the risers, sheet music rustling quietly. The first half of the concert flowed beautifully. The choir sang traditional hymns and folk songs, their voices filling the grand space. Evan couldn't help noticing how Sterling Whitaker sat straighter during each song, his usual stern expression softening. Eleanor, beside him, dabbed at her eyes during Be Thou My Vision. During intermission, Sterling rose from his seat. The room hushed as he walked to the center of the stage, his expensive suit catching the light. He cleared his throat, and Evan noticed Grace taking an involuntary step backward. Friends and neighbors, Sterling began, his voice steady but gentler than usual. Music has a way of opening hearts. Tonight, I need to open mine. He paused, his hands gripping the podium. Many of you have heard rumors, some true, some false. It's time for truth. The audience sat perfectly still. Evan moved closer to Grace, offering silent support. 6 years ago, I made choices based on fear and pride. Sterling's gaze found Noah in the front row. Those choices hurt people I should have protected. Today, I'm announcing publicly what DNA has confirmed. Noah Alvarez is my son. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Noah beamed, not fully understanding the weight of the moment, but happy to be acknowledged. Grace's eyes filled with tears. To Grace Alvarez, Sterling continued, turning toward her, I offer my deepest apology and my solemn promise of support. She has raised our son with dignity and love, asking nothing for herself. That changes today. He gestured to his lawyer, who stood and nodded. Legal documents are being filed to establish Noah's rights and inheritance. But more importantly, Grace will have the resources and respect she deserves as Noah's mother. The whispers grew louder, but Sterling wasn't finished. He turned to where Evan stood. Sometimes it takes a stranger's kindness to teach us about family. Evan Brooks stopped on a sleety morning to help 2 people in need. He asked nothing in return. That act of grace led to healing I didn't know I needed. Sterling pulled an envelope from his jacket. The Whitaker Guest House has sat empty for years. Tonight, I'm announcing its new purpose. Under Evan's stewardship, it will become a transitional home for struggling families and veterans. A place of second chances. Evan felt his throat tighten. Libby was grinning up at him, pride shining in her eyes. The legal paperwork is ready, Sterling said. Evan will oversee operations, with full funding from the Whitaker Foundation, because everyone deserves a helping hand, offered freely and without judgment. The audience broke into applause. Eleanor stood first, then others followed. Grace reached for Evan's hand, squeezing it quickly before letting go. Pastor Ruth stepped forward, raising her hands for quiet. What better way to celebrate new beginnings than with an old favorite? Please join us in singing Amazing Grace. The choir began softly, their harmonies rising clear and true. One by one, people stood, adding their voices. Noah scrambled onto Sterling's lap, singing loudly if not quite on key. Grace's soprano soared above the melody, years of hidden pain lifting with each note. Evan sang bass, the familiar words washing over him like a blessing. Around him, voices blended, rich and poor, old and young, all the barriers that had seemed so solid now melting away in song. For the first time since losing his wife, he felt real peace blooming in his chest, as sturdy and promising as spring flowers pushing through winter soil. The music filled every corner of the grand hall, but it was the sight of Noah's small hand reaching for Grace's, while his other held Sterling's, that made the moment complete. Libby leaned against Evan's side as they sang, and he knew, really knew, that sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in life's hardest moments. The dining room of the Whitaker mansion sparkled under the soft glow of vintage crystal sconces. Sterling had insisted on hosting this small dinner, despite looking tired all day. He sat at the head of the mahogany table, with Eleanor to his right and Grace to his left. Evan occupied a seat near Grace, while Libby and Noah whispered and giggled at the far end, their child-sized portions barely touched. The acoustics in that music hall never failed to amaze me, Sterling said, dabbing his mouth with a crisp linen napkin. His complexion seemed unusually pale against his dark suit. The choir's performance was exceptional. Thank you, sir, Evan replied, noticing how Sterling's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass. The children's section has really improved since Noah and Libby joined. Grace smiled warmly at the mention of their children. She wore a simple black dress tonight, her dark hair swept back elegantly. Noah hasn't stopped singing Amazing Grace since the concert. He's been practicing in front of his mirror. Sterling's lips curved into a gentle smile, but something flickered in his eyes, a flash of discomfort. He loosened his tie and shifted in his chair. Brother, are you feeling all right? Eleanor's sharp eyes hadn't missed the movement. You've barely touched your food. I'm fine. Sterling waved off her concern, but his breathing had become shallow. Just a bit warm in here. The butler approached with dessert plates, but Sterling raised his hand to stop him. Sweat beaded on his forehead now. His face had taken on an ashen quality that made Evan's stomach clench with worry. Mr. Whitaker? Grace leaned forward, her voice tight with concern. Sterling's hand suddenly clutched at his chest. The water glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. He doubled over, gasping. Sterling! Eleanor shot to her feet. Call 911, Evan commanded, already moving to Sterling's side. The butler rushed to the phone while Grace hurried to shield the children's view. Daddy? Noah's worried voice carried across the room. It's okay, sweetie, Grace called back, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Mr. Whitaker just isn't feeling well. Libby, can you take Noah to the library for a few minutes? Libby, understanding the gravity of the moment, nodded and took Noah's hand. Come on, I'll show you my favorite book about trains. Sterling's face had gone gray. His fingers dug into his shirt front as he struggled to breathe. Evan helped ease him onto the floor while Eleanor cradled her brother's head in her lap. The ambulance is on its way, the butler announced, returning to the room. Should I alert Mr. Whitaker's personal physician? Yes, immediately, Eleanor ordered, her usual commanding tone cracking with emotion. The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity. Paramedics arrived with their equipment, their urgent voices and swift movements filling the once peaceful dining room. They worked efficiently, attaching monitors and starting an IV. Suspected myocardial infarction, one paramedic reported into his radio. Patient is conscious but in severe distress. Beginning transport to County General. As they prepared to move Sterling onto the stretcher, his hand shot out and grabbed Grace's wrist. Noah, he managed to whisper. He's safe, Grace assured him, tears gleaming in her eyes. Don't worry about anything right now. The paramedics wheeled Sterling out to the waiting ambulance. Grace followed, her face set with determination. I'm riding with him, she announced, leaving no room for argument. Eleanor grabbed her car keys from her purse. I'll follow in my car. She turned to Evan, her usual mask of control slipping to reveal raw fear. Can you stay with the children? There's a guest room if it gets too late. Of course. Evan nodded. Don't worry about anything here, just keep us updated. The mansion felt eerily quiet after the ambulance's sirens faded into the distance. Evan found Libby and Noah in the library, curled up together on a leather armchair with a picture book. Noah's eyes were wide with worry. "Is my daddy going to be okay?" he asked in a small voice. Evan sat down beside them, pulling both children close. "The doctors are going to take very good care of Mr. Whitaker. Your mom went with him to make sure he's not alone." Hours crawled by. Evan read stories, played quiet games, and eventually got both children to sleep in one of the guest rooms. He sat in the hallway outside their door, alternating between prayer and anxious waiting. Just after midnight, headlights swept across the driveway. Evan went downstairs to find Eleanor in the foyer, looking exhausted but slightly less tense than when she'd left. "He's stable," she said without preamble. "They got him to the cardiac unit in time. Grace is staying overnight. She doesn't want to wake Noah." Evan felt some of his own tension ease. Thank God. What happens now? Eleanor's expression darkened. She glanced toward the stairs, then lowered her voice. Sterling had already started changing his will and trust documents after confirming Noah's paternity. But nothing's been finalized yet. She pressed her fingers to her temples. There are others. Distant relatives who've always resented Sterling's control of the family fortune. They'll see this as an opportunity. An opportunity for what? To challenge everything. The guest house arrangement, Noah's inheritance, all of it. Eleanor's eyes met his, sharp despite her exhaustion. You need to understand something, Mr. Brooks. In our world, outsiders are rarely welcomed with open arms. And right now, that's what you and Grace are. Outsiders. The weight of her words settled heavily in Evan's chest. He thought of the children sleeping peacefully upstairs, unaware that their newfound security might be built on shifting sand. Eleanor straightened her shoulders, once again the formidable woman he'd first met. You should get some rest. The guest room is ready, and the children shouldn't wake up alone in a strange place. She turned toward the stairs, then paused. Sterling was right about you, you know. You're a good man. I just hope that's enough for what's coming. 3 days after Sterling's collapse. The morning frost painted delicate patterns on the guest house windows. Evan sat at the kitchen table, nursing his second cup of coffee, when 3 sharp knocks echoed through the quiet house. Through the window, he spotted a sleek black sedan parked in the circular driveway. His chest tightened as he opened the door to find a man in an expensive suit holding a leather briefcase. Mr. Brooks? The lawyer's voice was clipped and professional. I'm Richard Blackwood from Hamilton Associates, representing the Whitaker Trust. Evan nodded, his throat dry. Come in. The lawyer declined with a curt shake of his head. That won't be necessary. He extracted a thick envelope from his briefcase. This is a notice to vacate the premises within 7 days. The previous arrangement has been deemed improper and is void pending review. The paper felt heavy in Evan's hands. His eyes scanned the legal jargon, catching phrases like unauthorized occupancy and immediate termination. But Sterling himself offered, Evan started. Mr. Whitaker's current medical condition has triggered certain trust provisions. Until matters are settled, all recent arrangements are suspended. The lawyer's expression remained impassive. We recommend securing alternative housing promptly. Before Evan could respond, he spotted Grace hurrying across the lawn, her face streaked with tears. Another suit-clad figure stood by her cottage door, holding similar papers. Ms. Alvarez has been placed on administrative leave without pay, the lawyer added, following Evan's gaze. These measures are temporary but necessary. Grace reached them, clutching her own stack of papers. They're suspending me, she whispered. No notice, no severance. They say it's pending investigation of improper conduct. Evan's jaw clenched. This isn't right. Sterling wanted. Mr. Whitaker's wishes are currently superseded by standing trust documents, the lawyer interrupted. Good day. They watched him stride back to his car. Grace's hands trembled as she held Noah's school photo. What am I going to do? I have no savings, nowhere to go. We'll figure this out, Evan assured her, though uncertainty gnawed at his stomach. Let me call Pastor Ruth, see if the church can help. Inside the guest house, Evan made calls while Grace sat at his kitchen table, mechanically folding and unfolding a paper napkin. Noah was at school, blissfully unaware of the morning's events. The doorbell rang again at 2 o'clock. Grace peeked through the window and went pale. Child Protective Services, she whispered, recognizing the badges. Two women stood on the porch, their expressions professionally neutral. Ms. Alvarez, I'm Sandra Martinez from CPS. We're here for a routine well-being check regarding Noah. Grace's hands shook as she let them in. Evan stayed close, his protective instinct on high alert. We received a report expressing concern about Noah's living situation, the older woman explained, pulling out a notepad. Current employment status? 2 was suspended this morning, Grace admitted, her voice barely audible. The younger agent made notes. Current residence? The cottage, but Grace's voice cracked. Miss Alvarez has been asked to leave, Evan interjected. But we're working on arrangements. The agents exchanged glances. And you are? Evan Brooks, I'm a friend. More notes. They inspected Grace's cottage, asked about Noah's schooling, his routine, his health. Each question seemed to drain more color from Grace's face. We'll need to schedule a follow-up visit once you've secured stable housing, the older agent finally said. Please keep our office updated on your new address. After they left, Grace collapsed onto Evan's couch, shaking. They're going to take him, she whispered. They're going to take my baby. Evan knelt in front of her, taking her trembling hands in his. Listen to me. That is not going to happen. We'll find a place. We'll figure this out. How? Grace's voice cracked. I have no job, no references now, no. You have me, Evan said firmly. I won't let them take Noah. Whatever it takes, we'll fight this. Grace looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. Why are you helping us? Because it's right, Evan replied simply. And because Sterling trusted us with his vision for this place. We can't let them destroy that. Through the window, they could see Eleanor's car pulling up to the main house. Somewhere in that mansion, Sterling lay unconscious, unaware that his dreams of redemption were unraveling. But in the quiet of the guest house, Evan's determination hardened into steel. They wouldn't just roll over and accept this injustice. Not when 2 children's futures hung in the balance. Grace wiped her eyes, straightening her shoulders. Noah will be home from school soon. I'll pick him up with Libby, Evan offered. You rest. We'll handle tomorrow when it comes. She nodded, managing a weak smile. Thank you, Evan, for everything. The clouds outside grew darker, promising more snow. But in that moment, Evan's resolve burned bright enough to chase away the shadows. They would find a way through this storm together. The weight of moving day. The cardboard boxes spread across the guesthouse floor like fallen dominoes. Evan folded another one into shape, the creases sharp and precise, while Libby sorted through her books nearby. Her usual bounce was missing as she placed each volume carefully into a box marked Libby's Room in purple marker. Dad, she asked, holding her favorite astronomy book, where will we put my telescope at the new place? Evan paused, his hands resting on the empty box. We'll figure something out, sweetheart. Maybe we can set it up by the window. The truth was, he had no idea where they'd end up. Their old apartment was already rented out, and affordable places were scarce in town. But he couldn't let his daughter see his worry. Footsteps on the porch made them both look up. Grace stood in the doorway, Noah clutching her hand. Dark circles rimmed her eyes, and her normally neat uniform was slightly wrinkled. I brought some more boxes, she said softly, from the mansion's storage. Noah broke free and ran to Libby, who immediately showed him her space books. The children's whispered conversation filled the heavy silence between the adults. You should be resting, Evan said, noting Grace's exhausted expression. You've been up since dawn. Grace shook her head. I can't sit still. And I can't go into town anymore. The whispers, the stares. She trailed off, straightening a stack of plates with trembling hands. Evan wanted to comfort her, but kept his distance. Their situation was precarious enough without feeding the gossip mill. Instead, he focused on wrapping cups in newspaper, each clink of ceramic against ceramic echoing through the room. Libby and Noah had created their own packing system, turning it into a game. They sorted Libby's books by color, making rainbow stacks that brought a brief smile to Grace's face. Blue goes here, Noah, Libby directed, like the sky in your drawing. Noah carefully placed a book in the designated spot. Will we still have reading time when you move? The innocent question hung in the air. Libby looked to her father, who felt the weight of both children's hopes on his shoulders. Of course you will, Grace answered quickly, but her voice wavered. We'll figure it out. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the boxes. Evan had just started on the kitchen cabinets when another knock came at the door. This time, Pastor Ruth stood on the porch, holding several covered dishes. "I thought you all might need some sustenance," she said warmly, stepping inside. Her gentle presence seemed to lift some of the heaviness from the room. She set the food on the counter and surveyed the scene, her eyes taking in the half-packed boxes and tired faces. Without a word, she pulled out paper plates and began serving still warm lasagna. "Children need fuel for all this hard work," she announced, motioning Libby and Noah over. They abandoned their book sorting and came running, the simple comfort of food bringing back some of their usual energy. Grace tried to decline, but Pastor Ruth wouldn't hear of it. "Sit," she insisted, fixing a plate for each adult. "The boxes can wait." They gathered around the kitchen table, one of the few pieces of furniture still in place. Pastor Ruth watched as they ate, her kind eyes noting how Grace's shoulders gradually relaxed and how Evan's worried frown softened slightly. "Before we continue," Pastor Ruth said when they'd finished, "I'd like us to pray together." She reached for Grace's hand on one side and Evan's on the other. The children quickly completed the circle. "Dear Lord," she began, her voice steady and sure, "we come to you in a time of uncertainty. These good people have shown kindness to others without asking for reward. Now they need your guidance and protection." Evan felt Libby's small hand squeeze his tighter. Through his closed eyes, he could sense Grace's quiet tears, though her breathing remained steady. "Grant them strength for each day," Pastor Ruth continued. "Show them the path forward, and help us as a community to support them. Remind us all that your love is steadfast, even when the way seems dark. Amen." "Amen," the children echoed solemnly. When they opened their eyes, something had shifted in the room. The boxes still loomed, the uncertainty remained, but they felt less alone in facing it. "Now then," Pastor Ruth said, standing up, "those dishes won't pack themselves, shall we?" She rolled up her sleeves and picked up a dish towel, her practical action breaking the spell of worry that had gripped them all day. Noah and Libby returned to their book sorting with renewed purpose, while Grace managed a genuine smile as she wrapped another plate in newspaper. Evan watched them all, his daughter's determined expression, Noah's careful handling of each book, Grace's gentle movements, and Pastor Ruth's quiet strength. They weren't just packing boxes anymore. They were holding on to hope, one piece at a time. Pastor Ruth stood at the simple wooden podium in the church hall, her weathered hands resting lightly on its edges. The evening light filtered through stained glass windows, casting warm colors across the gathered faces of townspeople who filled nearly every folding chair. The usual Wednesday night Bible study had transformed into something different, something urgent and heartfelt. "Friends," Pastor Ruth began, her voice carrying to the back of the room without need for the microphone. "We're here tonight because sometimes doing what's right requires more than silent support. It requires us to speak up." She gestured to Mrs. Henderson, an elderly widow who sat in her wheelchair near the front. The woman's silver hair caught the light as she straightened up to speak. "Last winter, my ramp was rotting through," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice thin but clear. "I couldn't afford repairs, and I was trapped inside whenever it rained. Evan Brooks came by with lumber he'd bought himself. Spent 3 weekends building me a new ramp, wouldn't take a dime." She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "And his little Libby. She sat and read to me while he worked. That's the kind of man he is." Frank Miller, who owned the hardware store, stood next. "Evan's been doing odd jobs around town for years. Always shows up early, charges fair, makes sure things are done right. When the Peterson kids lost their dad, Evan fixed their mom's leaky roof at cost, worked nights after his bus route to get it done before the big storm." One by one, people rose to speak. Sarah Chin from the food bank described how Evan volunteered twice a week, loading heavy boxes and delivering to homebound seniors. The high school principal praised his patience with troubled kids on his bus route. Then came the stories about Grace. Martha, a former Whitaker housekeeper now retired, spoke with quiet conviction. "I trained Grace when she first started," Martha said. "That girl works harder than anyone I've known. When I got sick last year, she brought soup to my house every Sunday. Noah would draw me pictures." She looked directly at the crowd. "And I never once heard her speak ill of anyone, even those who weren't kind to her." Tom Watson, who ran the grocery store, described how Grace would help elderly shoppers reach high shelves and carry bags to their cars, even when she was clearly exhausted from her own work. The choir director spoke of Grace's voice lifting others during hymns, though she often tried to stay in the background. She teaches Noah to share his snacks with kids who forget their lunch money," added Miss Wilson, Noah's kindergarten teacher. "That boy has such a generous heart, and that comes from his mother's example." The testimonies continued as the sun sank lower, casting longer shadows through the windows. A veteran spoke about Evan helping him repair his truck when he couldn't afford a mechanic. A young mother described Grace watching her children during a medical emergency, refusing payment. Pastor Ruth didn't rush anyone, letting each story land with its full weight. In the back row, Eleanor Whitaker sat very still, her usual perfect posture unchanged, but something shifting behind her eyes as she listened. Her leather portfolio lay unopened in her lap, the papers inside, whatever legal documents she'd brought, forgotten for the moment. A small girl raised her hand. Jenny Torres, who struggled with math. "Mr. Brooks helps me with homework when he drives the bus," she said shyly. "He says I'm smart. I just need to believe it. And now I got a B+ on my test." More voices joined in, building a picture not of charity cases, but of a community woven together through small kindnesses. The church maintenance man described Evan teaching him carpentry skills. The school cafeteria worker spoke of Grace's dignity when facing rude comments, how she taught Noah to respond to meanness with gentle words. The high school choir teacher rose last. "When we were short on funds for sheet music, I found an envelope in my mailbox with exactly the amount we needed. No name, but I saw Grace working an extra cleaning shift that weekend." She paused. "That's the thing about true goodness. It doesn't ask for credit." Pastor Ruth returned to the podium, but before she could speak, old Mr. Davidson struggled to his feet, leaning on his cane. He rarely spoke at meetings, but now his voice carried clear and strong. "My wife died last spring," he said. "That first Sunday after the funeral, I couldn't face coming to church alone. Found Evan and Libby on my porch that morning. They said nothing about church, just brought breakfast and sat with me. Grace and Noah came by that afternoon with dinner." He cleared his throat. "They didn't try to fix my grief. They just made sure I wasn't alone." A reverent silence fell over the hall. In her back row seat, Eleanor's hand moved to her throat, touching the string of pearls she always wore, the ones her brother Sterling had given her years ago. Her expression remained composed, but something had changed in the set of her mouth, in the way she looked at the assembled townspeople. Pastor Ruth let the quiet hold for a moment before speaking again. "These are the marks of character," she said softly. "Not wealth or status, but the daily choice to lift others up. To be generous when no one is watching. To respond to hardship with grace." She looked around the room. "The question before us now is, what will we do to support these good people in their time of need?" Eleanor Whitaker shifted in her seat, her fingers moving to the clasp of her portfolio. The end. The morning sun cast long shadows across the guest house porch as Evan sorted through another box of Libby's books. His daughter had insisted on packing her favorites first, though the thought of moving them again made his chest tight. A sharp knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Eleanor Whitaker stood on the doorstep, her usual stern expression softened by something he couldn't quite read. She wore a simple gray suit, but her hands, usually steady and controlled, fidgeted with a thick manila envelope. "Mr. Brooks," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "May I come in?" Evan stepped back, gesturing toward the living room where moving boxes lined the walls. "Of course, though I'm afraid we're a bit—" He gestured at the disarray. "No need to apologize." Eleanor's heels clicked on the hardwood as she moved to the kitchen table, the only clear surface left. "I was at the church last night." Evan's eyebrows rose. He hadn't spotted her in the crowd. "I stayed in the back," she continued, settling into a chair. "I heard every testimony. Mrs. Henderson about her ramp, the Thompson boys about their math tutoring, Sarah Chen about the groceries you delivered when her husband was in the hospital." She placed the envelope on the table. "It was illuminating. Those folks helped me as much as I helped them," Evan said quietly, taking the seat across from her. "That's what community means." Eleanor's fingers drummed once on the envelope. "My brother is a complicated man, Mr. Brooks. For years, I've defended his privacy, his reputation, sometimes at the cost of his happiness." She pushed the envelope forward. "But Sterling isn't just complicated. He's also very, very thorough." Evan looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. "This is a notarized codicil to Sterling's will," Eleanor explained. "He had it drawn up and signed the morning before his episode, before anyone could interfere." Her lips curved in what might have been pride. He knew what was coming. With careful hands, Evan opened the envelope and removed several official-looking documents. The Whitaker family crest was embossed at the top of each page. "He's establishing something called the Whitaker Haven," Eleanor continued. "The guest house is to be its permanent home. You, Miss Brooks, are named as Operations Director, with full authority to provide transitional housing for struggling families and veterans." Evan's hands trembled slightly as he scanned the pages. The legal language was dense, but certain phrases jumped out: permanent endowment, community service mandate, director's discretion in selecting residents. "There's more," Eleanor said, her voice softening further. "There's a detailed guardianship plan for Noah. It acknowledges Sterling's paternity while ensuring Grace retains primary custody. The boy will have both his mother's love and his father's support, legally protected." Evan looked up from the papers, studying Eleanor's face. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because last night I saw what my brother saw." She straightened in her chair. "You've created something here, Mr. Brooks. Not just repairs to a building, but repairs to people's lives. The way this community rallied around you and Grace. It's what Sterling always wanted for his legacy, even if he struggled to achieve it himself." She stood, smoothing her skirt. "The lawyers threatening eviction? They work for distant cousins hoping to contest the will. But this codicil is ironclad." Sterling made sure of it. She moved toward the door, then paused. "You should call your pastor friend. She'll want to know her faith in you was well placed." Evan walked her to the door, the document still in his hand. "Thank you, Miss Whitaker." "Eleanor," she corrected, then added with the ghost of a smile, "We're going to be working together, after all." After she left, Evan sat heavily in his kitchen chair, staring at the papers that could change everything. His hands weren't quite steady as he reached for his phone to dial Pastor Ruth's number. The courthouse buzzed with tension as Evan settled onto the hard wooden bench. Grace sat beside him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles white with worry. Across the aisle, three stern-faced men in expensive suits, Sterling's cousins from Boston, whispered with their lawyers. Evan glanced at Grace, noticing how she kept her chin high despite her trembling fingers. He wanted to reach over and squeeze her hand, but they'd agreed to maintain strict formality in court. Instead, he focused on Pastor Ruth, who stood calmly at the podium, a thick folder of papers in her weathered hands. "Your Honor," Pastor Ruth began, her voice steady and clear, "I've brought testimonies from over 50 members of our community regarding Mr. Brooks's character and his work with the Whitaker Haven Project." The judge, a silver-haired woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, nodded. "You may proceed, Pastor." Pastor Ruth opened the folder and pulled out the first letter. "This is from Mrs. Henderson, age 82. She writes, 'When my Harold passed last winter, I couldn't manage the steps to my front door. Mr. Brooks built me a ramp, refusing payment. He brought his little girl Libby, who painted flowers on the rails to make me smile. That's the kind of man he is. One who brings both help and hope.'" One of Sterling's cousins shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Their lead attorney stood up. "Your Honor, while these character testimonials are touching, they don't address the legal validity of this hastily drafted codicil." "I'll determine what's relevant," the judge said firmly. "Continue, Pastor." Pastor Ruth pulled out another letter. "From Dr. Martinez at the Children's Clinic. Mr. Brooks drives children to their medical appointments when parents can't leave work. He keeps books and toys in his truck to keep them calm. The Whitaker Haven Project isn't just about housing. It's about creating a network of support that our community desperately needs." More letters followed. The veteran whose roof Evan patched during a storm, the single mother whose car he fixed so she could keep her job, the elderly couple whose groceries he delivered during the worst of winter. Grace dabbed at her eyes with a tissue as the testimonies continued. Evan noticed even some of the courthouse staff were listening intently now, their usual professional detachment softening. "And now," Pastor Ruth said, "I'd like to share statements about Ms. Alvarez." She lifted another stack of papers. "From Mrs. Wilson, the mansion's former cook. Grace doesn't just clean rooms, she notices when people are hurting. When I was sick last year, she worked double shifts to cover my duties, then brought soup to my house. She's the kind of person who makes others feel valued." The opposing lawyer stood again. "Your Honor, Miss Alvarez's character isn't on trial here. The issue is whether Mr. Whitaker was unduly influenced when signing this codicil." "Objection noted," the judge replied. "But I'm interested in understanding the full context of this situation. proceed. Pastor Ruth read more testimonies from parents whose children Noah played with at church, from elderly residents who praised Grace's gentle patience, from staff at the mansion who spoke of her integrity and work ethic. Finally, Eleanor Whitaker rose from her seat in the front row. Her silk suit rustled as she walked to the witness stand, her heels clicking against the polished floor. After being sworn in, she sat straight-backed, meeting the judge's eyes directly. "Ms. Whitaker," the judge said, "you were initially opposed to this project. What changed your mind?" Eleanor adjusted her pearl necklace, a nervous gesture that surprised Evan, who'd never seen her anything but completely composed. "Your Honor, I've spent my life protecting my brother's interests. When Mr. Brooks arrived at the estate, I assumed he was another opportunist. I was wrong." She glanced at Evan briefly before continuing. "Sterling and I discussed the Whitaker Haven project extensively before his heart attack. He saw it as a chance to create lasting change in our community. The codicil wasn't hastily drafted. It was carefully planned. Sterling wanted to transform our family's legacy from mere wealth to genuine service." The opposing lawyer approached the bench. "Ms. Whitaker, isn't it true that your brother was under significant stress when he signed this document?" "My brother," Eleanor said firmly, "was clearer about this decision than I've seen him in years. He spoke of it as, and I quote, finally doing something that matters. The codicil bears his signature, his notarized intent, and my full support as his next of kin." She reached into her briefcase and withdrew a slim leather folder. "I have here Sterling's personal journal, in which he documented his plans for the Haven over several months. The entries show his careful consideration and his specific choice of Mr. Brooks as director, based on observing his work in the community." The judge accepted the journal, examining its pages carefully. Eleanor continued, her voice growing stronger. "Furthermore, I have meetings scheduled with our family's foundation board to establish permanent funding for the Haven's operations. This isn't a matter of if the project will continue, but how we can best support its growth." Evan felt Grace's shoulder brush against his as she leaned forward slightly. The cousins across the aisle were now whispering urgently with their lawyers, papers shuffling between them. "The codicil," Eleanor concluded, "represents my brother's wishes perfectly. He saw in Mr. Brooks and Ms. Alvarez something our family had lost touch with, the simple power of helping others. The Haven isn't just a building project. It's a restoration of purpose." The judge studied Eleanor over her reading glasses. "And you're prepared to testify that your brother was of sound mind and under no undue influence when he signed this document?" "Absolutely, Your Honor." Eleanor's voice rang with conviction. "I was there when he signed it. He said it was the first time in years he felt truly at peace with the decision." The courtroom fell silent as Judge Margaret Wilson shuffled her papers, reviewing the documents one final time. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Evan could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. Having reviewed all evidence presented, Judge Wilson began, adjusting her reading glasses, including the notarized codicil signed by Sterling Whitaker, the numerous character testimonies, and the statements from all involved parties. This court is prepared to render its decision. Grace's shoulders tensed. Across the aisle, Sterling's cousins leaned forward in their seats, their lawyers poised with pens ready. "First, regarding the validity of the codicil establishing the Whitaker Haven," the judge continued, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed room. "This court finds the document was executed properly, with Mr. Whitaker of sound mind, and under no duress. The codicil stands." A soft murmur rippled through the spectators. Pastor Ruth, seated behind Evan, whispered a quiet, "Thank you, Lord." "Furthermore," Judge Wilson went on, "Mr. Brooks' appointment as operations director is hereby confirmed. The guest house property shall remain designated for its intended charitable purpose, as outlined in the codicil." Evan felt a wave of relief wash over him. He noticed Eleanor nodding slightly from her seat in the front row. Now, regarding the matter of Noah Alvarez, the judge turned her attention to Grace, who sat up straighter. Having reviewed the DNA confirmation and Ms. Whitaker's expressed wishes, this court establishes the following custody arrangement. Grace's fingers gripped the edge of her seat. Evan resisted the urge to reach for her hand. "Primary physical custody shall remain with Miss Alvarez," Judge Wilson declared firmly. "Mr. Whitaker shall have visitation rights as agreed upon by both parties, with the understanding that Noah's current living situation and daily routine should face minimal disruption." Tears began to well in Grace's eyes, but she blinked them back, maintaining her composure. Additionally, the judge continued, Mr. Whitaker's financial obligations for Noah's care and education shall be administered through a trust, as outlined in the codicil. Ms. Alvarez will retain full decision-making authority regarding Noah's daily care, with major decisions to be made jointly. The judge set down her papers and removed her glasses, scanning the courtroom. Let me be clear. This arrangement prioritizes the child's stability and well-being. The court recognizes both the legal rights of the father and the primary caregiving role of the mother. Any attempts to use financial leverage to override Ms. Alvarez's parental authority will not be looked upon favorably. Sterling's cousins shifted uncomfortably in their seats as their lawyers scribbled notes. This court hereby dissolves the temporary injunction against the Whitaker Haven operations. Mr. Brooks, you may resume your duties immediately. Judge Wilson's expression softened slightly. The community testimonies presented here today speak volumes about the positive impact this project has already had. I expect it will continue to serve as a model of charitable work done right. With a sharp rap of her gavel, she concluded, Court is adjourned. The tension that had filled the room for hours suddenly lifted. Grace covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs of relief. Pastor Ruth immediately moved forward to embrace her. Evan stood, feeling slightly dazed, as their lawyer gathered their papers. The opposing lawyers were already filing out, their clients wearing tight-lipped expressions of defeat. Eleanor approached them slowly, her usual aristocratic bearing tempered by something softer in her eyes. She reached into her handbag and withdrew a ring of brass keys, each one polished to a warm glow. These belong to you now, Mr. Brooks, she said quietly, placing them in his palm. The metal was warm from being carried close to her heart. Not just to the guest house, but to all the spaces you'll need for Haven operations. She closed his fingers over them gently. Sterling was right about you, about both of you. The keys felt heavy in Evan's hand, not with weight, but with responsibility. They represented not wealth or status, but a sacred trust to help others find their way home. The late spring sunshine warmed the freshly painted walls of the guest house as Evan climbed down from his ladder, wiping sweat from his forehead. The white trim gleamed against the soft blue siding, making the whole building look fresh and inviting. Inside, the sound of Grace organizing linens in the first-floor bedrooms drifted through the open windows. "How's it looking up there?" she called out, her voice lighter these days. "Last bit of touch-up is done," Evan replied, gathering his painting supplies. "Just in time for the Thompson family tomorrow." The past month had been a whirlwind of activity. With the court's blessing and Eleanor's support, Evan had thrown himself into transforming the guest house. New insulation went into the walls, updated plumbing replaced the old pipes, and fresh carpeting covered the worn floors. Every repair felt like a promise being kept. Grace had jumped right back into her work at the mansion, but things were different now. Her new contract included healthcare benefits and clear boundaries about her schedule. Sterling, recovering steadily from his heart attack, had insisted on it. "Noah, careful with those brushes," Grace called out as their children darted past with painting supplies. Noah and Libby had appointed themselves official decorating assistants, though their enthusiasm sometimes outpaced their skill. "We're making the sign extra special," Libby announced, her hands already spotted with paint. The kids had set up their art station on the wide front porch, spreading newspapers across the wooden boards. Evan stepped inside to check the progress. The front room had been transformed into a welcoming sitting area, with comfortable second-hand furniture arranged around a coffee table. Pastor Ruth's congregation had donated most of it, along with dishes, towels, and other essentials for the families who would stay here. "The kitchen's all set," Grace reported, emerging from the back hallway. "I stocked the pantry with basics, and the church ladies are bringing welcome baskets tomorrow." They'd converted the large ground floor into 2 separate family units, each with its own bathroom and small kitchen area. Upstairs, 3 more rooms waited for future guests. The whole place smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. "Did you see the applications Eleanor approved?" Grace asked, pulling out a folder. 2 veteran families and a single mom with twins. They can all move in this month. Evan nodded, still amazed at how quickly things had fallen into place. The Whitaker Havens board, led by Eleanor and including Pastor Ruth, had established clear guidelines for the transitional housing program. Families could stay up to 6 months while getting back on their feet. "The employment counselor's coming next week," Evan said, checking his calendar. "And the financial literacy workshop starts Tuesday evenings." Outside, Noah's excited voice carried through the window. Look what we did, Mom. Grace and Evan stepped onto the porch to find both children beaming proudly at their handiwork. On a large wooden board, carefully painted letters spelled out "Welcome Home" in bright, cheerful colors. Little handprints decorated the corners, and Noah had added wobbly stars around the edges. That's beautiful, Grace said softly, kneeling to hug both kids. It's exactly what this place needs. Libby pointed to the still wet paint. We used happy colors because we want everyone to feel happy when they come here. And look, Noah added, pointing to the bottom corner where they'd painted tiny hearts. So they know there's lots of love here too. Evan felt his throat tighten as he watched the children admire their work. They understood, in their own way, what this place meant. It wasn't just a house, it was a chance for families to rebuild their lives, just as he and Grace had done. Once it dries, we can hang it right here, he said, indicating the space above the porch steps. Everyone will see it when they arrive. The kids supervised as Evan and Grace carried their masterpiece carefully into the shade to dry. Paint smudged their clothes and spotted their faces, but their proud grins made it worthwhile. Can we help welcome the new families tomorrow? Libby asked, bouncing on her toes. We can show the kids where everything is. Of course, Grace answered, smoothing her daughter's hair. That's what makes a house feel like home, having friends to welcome you. They stood together on the porch, looking out over the carefully tended flower beds Grace had planted. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawn, and somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed. The guest house, once empty and forgotten, now hummed with possibility. Noah tugged at Evan's sleeve. Can we check if the sign's dry yet? Give it time, buddy, Evan laughed. Good things are worth waiting for. The morning sun cast long shadows across the guest house driveway as a battered pickup truck rolled to a stop. Evan straightened his collar and walked down the front steps, Grace at his side. In the truck's cab, a young couple with two small children looked up at the building with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Welcome to Whitaker Haven, Evan said warmly as the family climbed out. The father, Derek Martinez, stood tall despite his visible limp, instinctively positioning himself between his family and the strangers. His wife Sarah held their sleeping toddler while their 6-year-old daughter Emily clutched a worn stuffed rabbit. I'm Evan Brooks, and this is Grace Alvarez, Evan continued, keeping his voice gentle. We're so glad you made it safely. Derek nodded stiffly, his military bearing evident even in civilian clothes. Thank you, sir. Ma'am. His eyes darted to their meager possessions in the truck bed, 3 duffel bags and a small box of toys. Please just Evan, he smiled, remembering his own early days of transition. Let me help with those bags. Grace stepped forward to Sarah, who was struggling to balance the sleeping child. May I show you inside? We have the corner apartment ready, with plenty of space for everyone. Sarah's tense shoulders relaxed slightly at Grace's warm tone. That would be wonderful, thank you. They made their way up the wide front steps, Evan and Derek carrying the bags while Grace led Sarah and the children. The entrance hall gleamed with fresh paint and polished wood floors. Libby and Noah had decorated the welcome board with colorful drawings of flowers and hearts. This way, Grace guided them down the sunny hallway to apartment 1A. She unlocked the door, stepping back to let the family enter first. Sarah gasped softly as they walked in. The afternoon light streamed through clean windows onto new furniture. A comfortable couch, a sturdy dining table with chairs, and warm table lamps. The kitchen counter held a welcome basket filled with fresh fruit, bread, and essentials. This is all for us? Emily whispered, her eyes wide. Every bit of it, Grace assured her, kneeling to the child's level. Would you like to see your room? Emily nodded eagerly, some of her shyness melting away. Grace led her down the short hallway to a bedroom with twin beds, decorated with cheerful quilts made by the church sewing circle. A small desk sat under the window, complete with crayons and coloring books. Derek stood in the living room, still holding a duffel bag, looking almost lost. Sir, Evan, I don't know what to say. When the VA counselor mentioned this place, you don't need to say anything, Evan replied quietly. I was there too, after my wife passed. Sometimes we all need a safe place to land. Sarah emerged from the second bedroom where she'd laid down the toddler. Her eyes were damp. The crib. How did you know we needed one? Grace is good at details, Evan smiled. The kitchen's fully stocked too. Enough groceries for at least a week, and there's a list of local resources on the fridge. Food bank schedule, job listings, counseling services. Whatever you need, we're here to help. But we can't possibly, Derek started. You can, Grace interrupted gently. That's what the Haven is for, a chance to catch your breath and build something new. Emily came running back, her rabbit forgotten on her new bed. Mama, there's books, and look, a tea set. Sarah caught her daughter in a hug, laughing through tears. I see, baby. It's wonderful. Why don't we let you all get settled? Grace suggested. Dinner's at 6 in the common room if you'd like to join us. No pressure. We always make extra. Derek finally set down the duffel bag, his military stance softening. Thank you, both of you. We'll be there. Outside the apartment, Evan and Grace paused in the hallway. The sound of Emily's excited chatter and Sarah's lighter laughter drifted through the door. They'll be okay, Grace said softly. You can see it in their eyes. They just needed someone to believe in them. That evening, after a lively dinner where Emily had charmed everyone and Derek had finally cracked a real smile, Evan and Grace sat on the guest house porch. The spring twilight painted the sky in soft purples and pinks. From inside came the sounds of Libby and Noah helping the Martinez family's children explore the toy corner. Grace's hand found Evan's on the porch swing. Did you ever imagine, that morning in the sleet, that we'd end up here? Not in a million years, Evan admitted, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. But I'm grateful for every step that brought us to this moment. Even the hard ones? Especially those, he said. They showed us what was possible when people stand together. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fireflies begin their evening dance over the lawn. The porch light illuminated the bright, welcome home sign the children had painted, its letters slightly crooked but full of heart. We did it, Grace whispered, leaning her head against his shoulder. We really did it. Through the window, they could hear Emily's delighted giggle as she discovered the puppet theater. Derek and Sarah's voices joined in, no longer strained with worry, but warm with hope. The first family of many who would find shelter here, under the Haven's roof. The evening settled around them like a gentle blanket, full of promise and peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but for now, they simply sat together, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, their hearts full with the quiet joy of coming home. The spring breeze rustled through the newly planted cherry trees along the Haven's playground. Noah hung upside down from the monkey bars, his dark curls swaying, while Libby pushed him gently. The sound of tires on gravel made them both look up. A sleek black car pulled into the circular drive. The back door opened, and Sterling Whitaker emerged slowly, leaning on a polished cane. Though thinner after his hospital stay, his bearing remained dignified. He paused, taking in the sight of the renovated guest house with its fresh paint and flowering window boxes. Noah dropped from the bars and stepped behind Libby, suddenly shy. He peeked around her arm as his grandfather approached, his small fingers twisting in the hem of his t-shirt. Hello, Noah, Sterling said softly, stopping a respectful distance away. I brought something for you. He reached into his suit jacket and withdrew a small model airplane, its silver wings catching the sunlight. Noah's eyes widened. He glanced up at Libby, who gave him an encouraging nod. Taking tiny steps, he emerged from behind her and approached Sterling. It's a P-51 Mustang, Sterling explained, carefully lowering himself onto a nearby bench. I used to build models like this with my father when I was about your age. Really? Noah's voice was barely above a whisper. He reached for the plane with tentative fingers. Indeed. Would you like to hear about how they flew? Noah nodded, inching closer. Sterling patted the space beside him, and after a moment's hesitation, Noah climbed up. Libby, sensing the private nature of the moment, quietly slipped away toward the house. Sterling held the model plane level, pointing out its features. See these long wings? They helped it stay in the air for hours. And this part here, he indicated the cockpit, is where the pilot sat. Did you ever fly one? Noah asked, his natural curiosity beginning to overcome his shyness. No, but I knew pilots who did. Brave men who protected others. Sterling's voice grew softer. Just like your mother protects you, and like Mr. Brooks protects everyone here at the Haven. Noah ran his finger along the plane's wing. Mom says Mr. Brooks is a hero 'cause he helped us when our car broke, and you're my grandpa 'cause you helped us too. Sterling's breath caught slightly at the word grandpa. He studied Noah's profilesso like his own at that age and felt an ache of regret for all the years lost. Noah, he said carefully, I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, even when they don't mean to. Mom says everybody makes mistakes, Noah offered. She says what matters is fixing them. A quiet chuckle escaped Sterling. Your mother is very wise. He watched as Noah made the plane swoop through the air. Would you like to build a model plane together sometime? I could teach you how they go together, piece by piece. Noah's face lit up. Can Mom watch too? Of course. We could set up a table right here at the Haven. From the guest house porch, Evan observed the scene with quiet satisfaction. He'd been working on repair estimates when Sterling's car arrived, and he'd stayed close in case Noah needed support. But the boy seemed to be handling the meeting well. Sterling noticed him and beckoned him over. Noah jumped up, airplane swooping overhead as he ran to show Libby his new treasure. He's a remarkable child, Sterling said as Evan approached. Grace has done an outstanding job despite. He trailed off, gripping his cane tighter. Despite having to do it alone, Evan finished gently. Yes. Sterling's shoulders squared. Mr. Brooks, Evan, I owe you a debt I can never fully repay. When I was. He gestured vaguely toward his chest, indicating his health crisis. You protected them. You stood between my family and those who would have hurt them, even though you had no obligation to do so. They're good people, Evan said simply. They deserve someone in their corner. They deserve me in their corner, Sterling corrected. But when I failed in that duty, you stepped in. You risked your own security, your daughter's stability, to shield them from gossip and legal threats. You gave them dignity when others would have exploited their situation. Evan shifted, uncomfortable with praise. Grace did the hard part. She never lost faith that things would work out for Noah's sake. And now they have. Sterling watched as Noah demonstrated his airplane's flying abilities to an admiring Libby. Thanks in no small part to you. The spring breeze carried the scent of cherry blossoms across the playground. Noah's laughter rang out clear and bright, a sound that would have been impossible in the tense atmosphere of just a few months ago. Sterling gripped Evan's arm briefly, conveying gratitude too deep for words, then began making his way toward the children to learn more about his grandson's aerial adventures. The late afternoon sun painted the mansion's white columns in shades of honey gold. Folding chairs dotted the sweeping front lawn, where about 50 townspeople gathered, their faces bright with anticipation. Pastor Ruth had arranged wildflowers in mason jars along the makeshift aisle, and someone had strung tiny white lights in the maple trees. Evan shifted in his chair on the small platform, tugging at his tie. He wasn't used to being the center of attention. Libby had insisted he wear his fancy shirt, the blue one she'd picked out for Christmas, and even helped iron it this morning. Now she sat in the front row next to Noah, both children dressed in their Sunday best, barely containing their excitement. Eleanor Whitaker stood at the podium, her silver hair gleaming in the sunlight. Gone was the Ice Queen who had first questioned Evan's motives. In her place stood a woman transformed by witnessing everyday kindness. When my brother Sterling first told me about his plans for the Whitaker Haven, Eleanor began, her voice carrying across the lawn, I confess I was skeptical. Our family has always been protective of its legacy. She paused, a small smile playing at her lips. But sometimes protection means letting go of old ways to embrace something better. In the third row, Sterling sat in a wheelchair, still recovering but looking stronger each day. He nodded at his sister's words, one hand resting on the armrest where Noah's small fingers were curled around his. The true measure of wealth, Eleanor continued, isn't in what we keep, but in what we share. Over these past months, I've watched Evan Brooks demonstrate this truth without ever saying a word about it. He fixed porches for elderly neighbors while his own future was uncertain. He tutored children after long days of driving his bus route. He showed us all what real dignity looks like. Grace sat next to Libby, her dark eyes shining. She wore a simple yellow dress that made her look like sunshine itself. When she caught Evan's glance, her smile held all the warmth of their shared journey. Today, we're not just handing over keys to a building, Eleanor said, lifting the brass keyring tied with a blue ribbon. We're entrusting a vision. The Whitaker Haven isn't charity, it's a promise to our community. A promise that says no one faces hard times alone. Pastor Ruth dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Behind her, several of the seniors Evan had helped with home repairs nodded in agreement. Even old Mr. Peterson, who'd initially grumbled about riffraff moving onto the Whitaker estate, was smiling. Evan Brooks, Eleanor turned to face him directly. Please stand. Evan rose, his heart hammering against his ribs. The wooden platform creaked under his feet. These keys represent more than access to buildings. Eleanor held them up. They represent our trust in your stewardship, the trust of this community, the trust of my brother, and most importantly, the trust of those who will come here seeking help and hope. She stepped forward, the keys catching the light. Will you accept this responsibility? Will you continue to show us what it means to lift others up, to turn wealth into welcome? Evan cleared his throat. I will, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion welling up inside him. With God's help and this community's support, I will. Eleanor placed the keys in his palm, then covered his hand with both of hers. Then, on behalf of the Whitaker family and our town, I officially present you with stewardship of the Whitaker Haven. The crowd erupted in applause. Someone started singing Amazing Grace, and others joined in. Libby jumped up from her chair, pulling Noah with her. Both children bounced with joy, their faces glowing. Speech, called Pastor Ruth, and others echoed her. Evan stepped to the podium, the keys warm in his hand. He looked out at the faces before him, faces that had become family over these months of struggle and triumph. His gaze settled on Grace, who gave him an encouraging nod. I'm not much for speeches, he began, but I know about building things, about measuring twice and cutting once, about making sure foundations are solid. He paused, gathering his thoughts. The Haven isn't just about giving people a place to stay. It's about building bridges between neighbors. It's about measuring our success by how many folks we lift up, not how much we have. And it's about making sure every person who comes through these doors knows they matter. More applause rippled through the crowd. Sterling raised his hand in a small salute, and Noah waved frantically from beside him. Thank you for trusting me with this, Evan continued. But more importantly, thank you for showing me what community really means. Together, we're going to make the Haven live up to its name. As the applause swelled again, Grace rose from her seat and climbed the few steps to the platform. She slipped her hand into his, squeezing gently. The touch grounded him, reminded him of how far they'd both come. Haven! 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 Libby and Noah started chanting, their young voices carrying across the lawn. Soon others joined in, the sound swelling like a wave of hope. Evan felt Grace's hand tighten in his as their children's joyful cheers filled the air. In that moment, standing in the golden light with the mansion keys in his hand and Grace by his side, he knew that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as challenges, and the truest wealth lies in the hearts we touch along the way. The summer evening settled over the Whitaker mansion like a warm blanket, turning the sky into a canvas of pink and orange watercolors. On the sprawling front lawn, checkered blankets dotted the grass where families gathered for an impromptu community picnic. The air carried the sweetness of fresh-cut grass and the lingering scent of barbecue from the grills that had been burning all afternoon. Evan sat on the largest blanket, his back against an old oak tree. Grace rested against his shoulder, her dark hair catching the golden light. They watched as Libby and Noah darted across the lawn, mason jars clutched in their small hands, chasing the first fireflies of the evening. Got one, Libby called out, her voice carrying across the grounds. Noah bounced beside her, peering into her jar where a tiny light blinked like a fallen star. Me too, he shouted, holding up his own jar proudly. Look, Mommy! Look, Evan! Grace smiled, reaching for Evan's hand. I never thought we'd be here, she said softly. Sometimes I still can't believe it. Neither can I, Evan admitted, squeezing her fingers. He looked around at the families scattered across the lawn, veterans with their children, single mothers who'd found refuge at the Haven, elderly couples who'd become regular visitors. Some sat in lawn chairs, others sprawled on blankets, all sharing food and conversation as twilight deepened. Pastor Ruth moved among the groups, her gray hair gleaming silver in the fading light. She stopped to chat with each family, her warm laugh mixing with the chorus of voices. When she reached Evan and Grace's blanket, she lowered herself carefully to sit with them. This, she said, gesturing to the scene before them, this is what healing looks like. From somewhere near the mansion, someone started playing guitar. The gentle notes floated across the lawn, and soon voices joined in, singing an old hymn that seemed to embrace the gathering darkness. Would you mind if I say a few words? Pastor Ruth asked, her eyes twinkling. My heart is just too full to keep quiet. Evan nodded, and Grace sat up straighter. Pastor Ruth didn't raise her voice, but somehow it carried, drawing people's attention naturally. Even the children paused in their firefly chase to listen. Friends, she began, when I look at what's happened here at the Haven, I see more than just a beautiful old house opening its doors. I see broken hearts finding healing. I see strangers becoming family. I see God's hand in every nail Evan has hammered, every meal Grace has shared, every smile these children have brought to our lives. Libby and Noah crept back to their blanket, settling between Evan and Grace. Noah's jar glowed with 3 fireflies, while Libby's contained a small constellation of blinking lights. This place, Pastor Ruth continued, her voice rich with emotion, isn't just about providing shelter. It's about creating sanctuary. It's about showing that love can transform any house into a home, any stranger into family. She reached out, taking Grace's free hand in hers. And these two, she smiled at Evan and Grace, they've shown us what it means to trust in God's timing, to believe in second chances, to open our hearts when it would be easier to close them. The guitar music had softened to gentle picking, providing a peaceful backdrop to her words. More fireflies rose from the grass, dancing like earthbound stars around the gathered families. So tonight, Pastor Ruth raised her hand in blessing. I ask God's continued blessing on the Haven, on all who find refuge here, and especially on this family who has taught us so much about courage and kindness. Amen, came the soft chorus from around the lawn. As if on cue, the mansion's landscape lights clicked on, casting a warm glow across the grounds. The children returned to their firefly hunt, their laughter trailing behind them like ribbons in the growing darkness. Evan watched as Noah carefully released his fireflies, then ran to join the other children. Libby followed suit, setting her captured stars free to dance away into the night. The guitar player had switched to Amazing Grace, and voices around the lawn joined in, some humming, others singing softly. Let's walk down to the guest house, Grace suggested, standing and offering her hand to Evan. Together, they strolled down the gentle slope, Pastor Ruth's blessing seeming to follow them like a gentle breeze. The guest house stood warm and welcoming in the gathering dusk, its windows glowing with soft light. On the front porch, precisely where the children had placed it that morning, sat the brick they'd painted together. The bright letters spelled out, "Welcome Home," in careful brushstrokes, each letter decorated with tiny handprints. Someone had propped open the heavy wooden door with that painted brick, letting the evening air flow through the entrance hall where so many new beginnings had already started. Through the open door came the sounds of life, dishes clinking in the kitchen where dinner was being prepared for the newest family, children's feet on the stairs, laughter from the common room where 2 veterans were playing chess. The hymn from the lawn drifted down, mingling with the everyday music of the house. Above them, the mansion's windows caught the last light of day, glowing like warm beacons in the deepening blue of evening. Grace leaned her head against Evan's shoulder as they stood looking at their painted brick. "Welcome home," she whispered, echoing the words their children had so carefully painted. The fireflies continued their dance around them, nature's own celebration of light in the darkness, as evening settled fully over the Haven. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you thought this was just the beginning, you're right. Click through and see where the story takes you next. If you enjoyed the story of Evan Brooks, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it. If you enjoyed the story of Evan Brooks, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.